we have been reading Sri Aurobindo's early writings. In fact, not only in his early writings but even subsequently, almost one can say in all his writings, there is one constant refrain. And this refrain is a most beautiful reconciliation, or if one may say so, a harmonious reconciliation of all that we in our limited consciousness find contradictory. He reconciles opposites. It is as if we are approaching from an age of division to an age of harmonious synthesis. And that's why perhaps one of the well-known works of Sri Aurobindo starts with the synthesis of yoga, which is not just a synthesis of the various yogic disciplines, but if we take a close look, a synthesis of man himself. During the first year of the Arya, this question was asked to Sri Aurobindo: what is the most needed synthesis at this point of time? And he said, indeed, of man himself, because man is a bundle of contraries. In Savitri, we have very beautiful lines, as always, describing man, a cross between the demigod and the beast. A strange antinomy is his nature's role. A field of opposites, a riddle of opposites is made his field. And some of the opposites Sri Aurobindo points out, which are very interesting. Freedom he asks, but needs to live in bonds. Man is an incorrigible seeker after freedom, but man would never be happy if he is left alone and said, now you are free. He would want somebody or the other, something or the other to tie himself to. Freedom he asks, but needs to live in bonds. He has need of darkness to perceive some light, and need of grief to feel a little bliss. He has need of death to find a greater life. This is the bundle of contraries or opposites, and there is a great purpose and wisdom in this planning of God, though we may curse this state, because this is the greatest difficulty of all of us, that we are constantly pushed from one pole to another. In fact, in God these are very beautifully reconciled. And one of the, in fact, yoga is a way to reconcile opposites. One can almost define yoga as a way to reconcile all that contradicts. We see in the Gita this great vision and the building up of the vision, because Gita starts with one of these opposite tendencies, very beautifully phrased in one of the literary works, to be or not to be. Arjuna puts it another way: to fight or not to fight, to act or not to act, should I be this or should I be that. Sri Krishna builds him step by step and takes him to a point where he shows that within everything there is the same one reality. That's all right, that's one way to reconcile, but it is not enough. So he further prepares his mind to show that this one reality is also manifested in this manifold universe. And in each separate element, that reality is present as a special quality. Arjuna understands, but he is not able to still quite grasp. But his mind is prepared through this kind of awakening. And then finally we see the grand vision, which Sri Aurobindo very beautifully says that this vision many people interpret in a very narrow way. But there is another way to look at this vision. Pashyame yogam aishwaryam. So he says the deeper way is that within the being of Sri Krishna, all contradictions are reconciled. And that is the deeper way, the Lord of sweetness and the Lord of strength, the Lord of beauty and delight, and the Lord terrible and difficult. The great heroes and warriors who stand for truth, and the great heroes and warriors who oppose them. Creation, destruction, the many universes and the individual soul struggling in it, the individual and the cosmos, all are reconciled in a single unity of the divine omniscience and omnipresence. Of course, this greater reconciliation comes by the grand vision. And Aurobindo says that he who has not the courage to seek this side of existence is not fit to have the vision of God. He takes it to that extent, that if we really want to have the full vision, the full truth, the integral truth, we must make some effort in our consciousness to face, observe, and then reconcile what look like apparent contradictions to our surface view. Because if we go to the root of contradictions, is basically the nature of the mind cannot reconcile opposites. The way it logicizes it, that it blurs everything else, takes one single aspect, and by emphasizing upon it, analyzing the data, it starts discarding one by one all other possibilities, and thereby it arrives at a conclusion. But this is a very limited conclusion, because it discards many things which have not yet manifested. It, as they say, washes the baby away with the bathwater. So the logical mind cannot arrive at truth, nor can the scientific mind arrive at truth, because scientific mind limits its very field of observation, and therefore it arrives at truth by a kind of negation of all other things which its own field cannot understand or experience. And Aurobindo says it in a very simple way. He says, if you tell a scientist, I am hungry, so he'll say, oh yes, of course, come, let's have something. Because he immediately believes that by the instruments given by nature, you are experiencing hunger, which is nothing else but a subjective sense, and he accepts it. But if you tell the same scientist by other instruments, higher instruments, and in another field of observation, I am seeing God, so immediately he will say, have you seen the psychiatrist of late? Is everything okay with you? Because he limits his field of inquiry, and by limiting his field of inquiry, he limits the totality of truth. So neither the logical, philosophical mind nor the scientific, intellectual mind can arrive at truth. And Aurobindo says, nor can the mind of the practical man, which is the most unsuited and unfit to reconcile the contradictions of truth, because it is not really interested in any contradiction or their reconciliation, but his interest is only in the immediate, and what serves his limited egoistic interest. And that is why the first effort of yoga, and that's why we see Aurobindo's writings are so perfectly placed, that the only way to really enter into their depth is by making the mind ascend to a point where it can reconcile or begin to have some glimpse. Speech and silence, the mic and it's falling away. So, one problem why we are not able to reconcile truth is because Aurobindo would reveal to us that because we think of truth as a fixed and a static thing. So we look at all things as they are today in terms of space, and we think truth must be something like that. But there is another aspect of truth, that constantly new things are emerging out of it, and old things are going back into it. That adds another dimension to truth, what is called as time dimension. So this is the great paradox which we are set to solve, and in man these things have been brought very close, especially in today's times. To use a story in a metaphorical way, in fact two stories. One is the story of the Sphinx. Story of the Sphinx we all know, so we need not repeat it, that the great Greek hero Oedipus Rex is crossing the Theban desert, and he is met by a strange creature who has body of a lion, wings of a bird, and face of a woman. And this strange creature asks an equally strange question, that before you cross this desert, tell me, who is that creature who walks on 4 in daytime, in the morning, on 2 in the afternoon, and 3 at night? Now the beauty of this riddle is that Both within the Sphinx and within this question, you have to reconcile the opposites. Sphinx is a strange creature. He is bird and beast and woman, all of them together. And within the question, there is another side. It's a dynamic movement. What is it that remains unchanging through all the different states of consciousness that human beings pass through? Of course, Oedipus gives a very cryptic and profound answer. I am the answer. And the Sphinx has told that, look, if you answer it, you cross. If you don't, I will devour you. And if you answer it, I get destroyed. So this is the whole story. All the contradictions of life get destroyed when we have found the reconciling truth. The other story is from the Indian context. It's not a story, but 2-3 stories which we can put together to reconcile. We see that in the age of Rama, you have good people on one side in one kingdom. All the good people were in Ayodhya except perhaps one man who doubted later on. And all the bad people seems to be were in Lanka except one man who, in spite of being in Lanka, was constantly, these exceptions are exceptions, they don't make the rule. So, but as a rule, the good were on one side, the bad were on another. Very distinct demarcation. The task is also limited. Comes the age of Krishna, and good and bad are in the same family. So much so that Arjuna is confused. He says, I can't decide whether I am right or I am wrong. Right across me I see Bhishma, Drona, Kripacharya. These are men worthy of respect, of love, of adoration, of reverence. How can I fight against them? It's in the same family. Sri Aurobindo makes the task still more difficult, or shall we say still more easier. Now we have not good and evil on two sides. We don't have them in the same family. We have it within the same human heart. And in the reconciliation of these contradictions and opposites opens the path to our own greater evolution. If we can reconcile it, because if we try it with the rational mind, we cannot. This is an impossibility. It cannot. By its very nature, it cannot. The only way is to arrive at a higher synthesis. And that is why we see that the mother, when she speaks of different kinds of education and education of the mind, she says one of the cardinal elements, essential elements in mental education is to form a thesis, then to form an antithesis, and then to arrive at a synthesis. And this is the refrain that we find throughout in Sri Aurobindo's writings. Not only does he reconcile the finite and the infinite, not only does he reconcile unity and or oneness and multiplicity, but he reconciles the scientific spirit and the religious aspiration, materialism and spirituality, Eastern thought and Western approach to life. All these things he has brought together and reconciled in a very harmonious way, because there are ways of reconciling which can be disharmonious. There are ways of reconciling where we exclude the very objects that we have to reconcile. For instance, there is a way of reconciling. Materialists or material scientists do it all the time. They say, yes, there is unity in this cosmos because everything is made up of matter. So now you ask them, what is God? Say, nothing but a secretion of a gland. So it's a material phenomena. So that's one way to reconcile, by doing away with the problem. So all else that cannot be reconciled doesn't exist. So the spiritualist denies certain things, materialist denies certain things. But we have entered into an age of paradoxes. And the reason why we have entered it, so that we can arrive at a greater and harmonious synthesis. Now, this is what we read. One of the most difficult, we are reading it through the Tuesdays, but one of the most difficult problems when it comes to reconciling is the problem of good and evil. And we know the famous question or issue raised by Anatole France, which Dilip Kumar Roy had taken to Sri Aurobindo. He asked a question, if there is God, why there is so much evil and suffering in the world? And he, with his logical mind, tried to reconcile it by excluding the problem. This is a perfect example of how we try to reconcile and fail. So he says, God is omnipotent and omniscient. This is the premise. So if God allows evil, now is it that he can cure evil but does not? So he is capable of doing it but does not do it. In which case he is perverse. Logical conclusion is correct. Because he is capable of doing it. He is omnipotent, but he doesn't remove evil. Second, he says, if he cannot cure evil, he would, but he cannot. Means he is well-meaning, but evil is gone beyond him. It's like creation has become autonomous. He doesn't have any more say in it. So he says in that case, he is impotent. He is not all-powerful. And then he says, if he can and would, why doesn't he do it? Now this is the paradox. And we have so many paradoxes in every sphere of life. We can, in everything we have paradoxes. In the world of science, just to take a little sidetrack, if we ask which is bigger, then everybody would say this is bigger. Now if we break it into small points, we will say this is made of infinite points and this is made of infinite points. So we have arrived at a logical paradox, an impossibility. Both, one is bigger than the other to the senses, but in the depths, there is no difference between the two because both have infinity of points. So this is the way, mind often plays. Another one of the logical improbables is, before we take this passage, that is God omnipotent? Yes. So can he make himself weak? Now this is a logical paradox. If he is omnipotent, he should be able to make himself weak. If he makes himself weak and becomes weak, is he still omnipotent? So one of the things that is necessary in this age, these are for children, of course. As grown-ups, we have to meet with much more difficult paradoxes, and in their reconciliation lies the path of a greater becoming. So this is an essay, again, we are reading some of his earlier essays, Beyond Good and Evil, because this is the most difficult problem for human mind to reconcile. God is beyond good and evil. Man moving Godwards must become of one nature with him. He must transcend good and evil. As long as we are moving in the dualities of either good or evil, we cannot arrive at Godhood. We have to move beyond both. This is the first thing Aurobindo is revealing to us, a hard doctrine for the ethical and moralistic and the Puritan mind, because it always swings between this or that. So, having given us this vast goal before us, now he is step by step revealing to us God is beyond good and evil, not below them. So the moment we say he is beyond good and evil, the first thing is, it doesn't matter what we do. After all, we can do anything because just like God, good and evil are only figments of the human mind. So he is saying God is beyond good and evil, not below them, not existing and limited by them. So he is beyond good and evil, but you cannot limit his perfection to this or that. Not even above them, but in a more absolute sense, exceedent and transcendent of the ideas of good and evil. So first thing he is revealing to us is, good and evil take birth in the human mind because of a certain necessity. Now he is bringing us the movement aspect, that good and evil are not absolute things, the human good and human evil. They are emergent things. In the process of evolution, poison comes out as much as the nectar of immortality, of course, comes in the end. And there are herbs that heal and there are herbs that harm, and they come out in the process of evolution, bitterness and sweetness. So also, good and evil emerges in the mind as ideas. He exceeds them in his universality. They exist in him, but the values of good and evil which we give to things is not their divine or universal value. So, in the lower state and the higher state, the values change. When a great tsunami comes and destroys lakhs of lives, or a tiger devours a deer, we don't say how evil. We just look at it. It's neither good nor evil. Or when the divine engages into a great pralaya A whole cycle of creation is absorbed back into himself. As we know in the spiritual literature, that at the end of a 4 yugas, the whole creation is absorbed back. Now naturally this absorption means there is a holocaust and there is a mass destruction. But we don't say, oh, he is so evil because he is doing it. They, that is good and evil, are only their practical value created by us in our psychological and dynamic dealings with life. So does it mean that good and evil has no meaning at all? He says no. In our dynamic dealings with life, in our present state of consciousness, we need to distinguish the two. If we don't distinguish, we will enter into a confusion, what is known as Dharma Sankara, the confusion of dharmas. So good and evil are needed for human evolution at a stage of human evolution. God recognizes them and seems to deal with us on the basis of this valuation of life, but only to such an extent as may serve his purpose in nature. It looks as if God is deliberately encouraging good and he is deliberately destroying evil, but the problem is not so simple as that. In one of Aurobindo's poem, which is very amazing, the poem is on Ravana, and all these sages, the poem's name is Rakshasa, and it's on Ravana. So all these sages pray with Atri at the foremost, and pray to whom? To Sri Krishna. They say that Ravana is ruling this world and everything is in disarray. What about your promise? Now I have not read this anywhere, this in the scriptures, that where is this episode of rishis praying to Krishna, but since Aurobindo says so, it is true. Scriptures must have missed out or forgotten about it. But nevertheless, so Sri Krishna says, why are you in a hurry? He has ruled for an aeon, and for an aeon he will rule. So he says, why? He says, you see, he was necessary in the evolution. And evolution could have been ill-spared in his absence. So he says, this is strange. How is then, is there a term to him? So Sri Krishna says, yes, there is a term to him, and a day will come when he will fall. But not just to anyone, not even to gods, because that leap is not possible. He will fall either to the animal or to the human. Now the whole story of Ramayana is given a totally new meaning. That the fall of Rakshasa and the emergence of the human and the animal type is a step in evolution. Not by the gods can Ravana be fallen, because gods will come later. From human we can leap to that stage, not directly from the state of being an Asura and Rakshasa. So here we have the steps and stages that these things come, and it seems that God has put himself on one side, but actually he is working in all, and only for his immediate purpose in nature he seems to act in a certain way. In his universal action he is not limited by them. So though he is sitting on the side of the Pandava on the Ratha of Arjuna and declares, I am with you, it doesn't mean that his Kauravas are an abandoned forsaken children. It is he who is within them also. This is the beauty of his being and becoming. But into his transcendental being, of which his higher universal is the image, they do not at all enter. There in the highest universal, which is to us transcendent, is only the absolute good, of which both our good and evil have in them certain differentiated elements. To understand this, very simple, evil, good is moving towards a greater good. It is a shadow and reflection. What we call as human good is not the end of the journey. So human love, human strength, human peace, human unity, they are very nice things, but they are only reflections of a greater love, a greater unity, a greater truth which must emerge. So this is the first thing that he reveals. Second, evil is good in the making. So what we call as evil is often good in the making, just as a caterpillar shuts itself in a cocoon and it loses its caterpillarhood, it struggles, suffers, and is in pain. But this is the passage towards the beautiful colored winged butterfly rising into the sky. So evil is good in the making. The other thing which he reveals about evil is things which should have passed out of existence and have passed out in their inner essence, but continue to exist on the physical plane. They are evil. So at one point of time, Kauravas are as nice people as Pandavas, but a time comes when they must pass out of existence and have passed out in the consciousness of Krishna, but on the physical plane they must, it will be a gory battle. So he says that is now not evil, but that must pass away. And this is the explanation the mother gives in one of her writings when she comments on one of the aphorisms of Sri Aurobindo in volume 10. She says, what is evil? Evil is something which is not in its right place. That's all. Very simple. There is nothing like absolute evil. Something which is fine at one point. A 2-year-old child pushes his parent and says, you are very bad, and even, sometimes is very rough. It's fine. We simply take it as a childish prank. But a 20-year-old child pushes his mother and makes sure that she has a fracture, becomes something which is anachronistic. In terms of time, one doesn't expect. When a person who is absolutely ignorant of yogic value and higher things acts as a total ignoramus, it's perfectly fine. But someone who is awakened inside and is moving on the path of yoga, when he does certain things, the consequences are far more serious. So what is at one time perfectly justified becomes evil at another stage of evolution. Neither our good nor our evil are or can of themselves give the absolute good. Both have to be transformed. Evil into good, good into pure and self-existent good, before they can be taken up into it. So this is man's journey. What is evil must change itself into good. It must catch up with the times, to say the least. So at one point of time, Sri Aurobindo says something very interesting. Human notions he hits very hard. Somebody asked him, is it good to sacrifice goats in Kali temple? It's a very gory thing if anyone has witnessed. So he says, it's not necessary, something to this effect, but equally sacrificing it to your belly god. If you take it in principle, then whether you sacrifice it before a goddess or you sacrifice to your belly god, fundamentally it is the same. You are sacrificing a goat at the altar of your ego. Whether it is at a religious ego or whether it is at a very vital ego, that is up to each one to decide. Then he says, at one point of time, even these things had their purpose, including something like human sacrifice, the ancient civilizations. It had its purpose. It was one way to remind human beings that none of us is greater than the total or the greater truth or the greater reality of the collectivity. But that today would be absolutely obnoxious and must pass out of existence. So he says evil must move towards good, and good also must move, because otherwise the danger is it gets shut into a limited human formula of righteousness and virtuosity. So Sri Aurobindo says it's, of course, Sattvic man is easier to turn him towards God. But he has three main problems. One is, he is bound by this sense of virtuosity and righteousness. Second is, he is bound by the sense of duty. And third is, he is bound by family affections. Sattvic people have that thing in nature. And he says, while it's easy to get rid of the last two, it's very difficult for him to get rid of virtuosity and self-righteousness. And the way to get rid of it is that he understands that what I call today as human good is a shadow of a greater divine good. Human love is a shadow of divine love. Human truth is a shadow of divine truth. Human strength is something much weak compared to the divine strength and all the rest. This explains the nature of the universe, which would otherwise be inexplicable, inconsistent with the being of God. The question of Anatole France is foreseen and answered even before it was sent. This is written before Dilip Kumar Roy even came to meet Sri Aurobindo. So he has already foreseen it and answered it. God must be beyond limitation by our ideas of good. Otherwise, the universe, such as it is, could not exist, whether as the partly manifested being of a divine existence or a thing created or permitted by a divine will. Naturally, if God was only the human good, then many things in the universe would be very difficult to understand. People try to make a philosophy where they shut their eyes, ears, and I think it's the mouth, and they say, see no evil, hear no evil. That's one way to not reconcile, but to abandon the problem altogether. But that is not the solution. There is the fact of what we can call in our human sense as evil. It exists. Existence or a thing created or permitted by a divine will. He cannot either be evil. Otherwise, in man, his highest terrestrial creature or his highest terrestrial manifestation, there could not be this dominant idea of good and this stream of tendency towards righteousness. This is the evolutionary journey, and human beings understand this. As humans, we understand. Whether we can put it into practice or not, but we do feel, at least we pay lip service to goodness. We may betray it in all our private acts, but we do pay lip service. So he is neither evil nor good. He cannot be a mixture of good and evil, whether a self-perplexed and struggling or a mysteriously ordered double principle, Ormuzd and Ahirman, that is light and darkness, or Deva and Asura. Or at least he cannot be limited by this duality, for there is much in the universe which is neither good nor evil. Matter is neither good nor evil. Perhaps the greater part of the totality is neither supramoral or inframoral or simply amoral. And then he reconciles after preparing this whole dynamic background. Good and evil come in with the development of mental consciousness. Animals don't have this debate inside the mind. We see this even in comics. Tintin comics, there is this dog called Snowy. If anyone has read, beautiful comics, very psychological. And in this dog keeps debating whether I should eat the bone or not eat the bone. Eating the bone may be greed, but if I let it go, it's such a tasty dish. So man debates this. Actually, it's not really an animal's cup of tea. So it comes with mind, mental consciousness. They exist in their rudimentary elements in the animal and primitive human mind. They develop with the human element, human development. Good and evil are things which arrive in the process of the evolution. There is then the possibility that they will disappear in the process of the evolution. So what we call as good and evil are not absolute. They disappear as human consciousness grows beyond the mental to the supramental stage, which is the next stage. We have 3 minutes, so we can 5 minutes, but we'll just need 3 minutes to close with some beautiful lines from Savitri, where this freedom from dualities comes to Ashupati, freedom from ignorance, which creates opposites and cannot understand, is baffled at appearances. And this freedom comes by rising to a plane where all these are reconciled in a greater light. Just as in that greater light of Sri Krishna, all the questions of Arjuna are reconciled. Just as Sri Aurobindo brings to us the supramental truth, in which all other truths are spontaneously reconciled, effortlessly. If we read Sri Aurobindo, we see there is no labor of the intellect, and yet there is a reconciliation. So, these lines from Savitri, these lines are the end of the release of Ashupati from ignorance, the soul's release from ignorance, and how it comes about. So long as we are moving between dualities, there is no freedom. Page 32 and 33. A vast unanimity ended life's debate. This is the life's debate. Swinging between opposites. So what is that unanimity which ends life's debate? The war of thoughts that fathers the universe. These conflicts and opposites are required so that human beings can evolve. That's why he allows it. The war of thoughts that fathers the universe, the clash of forces struggling to prevail, in the tremendous shock that lights a star, as in the building of a grain of dust, the same truth that has spun the galaxies from its single hand is also the truth that has buried itself in a grain of sand. The hand that sent Jupiter spinning through heaven spends all its cunning to fashion a curl. The grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space, ploughed by the seeking of the world's desire, the long regurgitations of time's flood, revolutions, march of the civilizations, the rise and collapse of empires, the torment edging the dire force of lust that wakes kinetic in earth's dullard slime, the lust that is needed to prick matter to awaken, and carves a personality out of mud, the sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed. He is reconciling as he is moving upward. The sorrow, why there is sorrow in the world? Nature's hunger is fed. The estrus which creates with fire of pain. If there was no pain, there would be no new birth. If there was no sorrow, man would not seek something greater and climb further. The fate that punishes virtue with defeat. This is also a paradox. In this world, it's not always the good who are rewarded, contrary to what we were taught as a child. That, if you are a good man, you will always be rewarded, you will be successful in life, you will get a lot of money, good job, blah, blah, blah. As you grow up, you realize it's not true. But perhaps our values system of good and bad and reward and punishment is not true. That we seldom think. But here he is saying the fate that punishes virtue with defeat. Story of Pandavas. The tragedy that destroys long happiness. The weeping of love. The quarrel of the gods. How to reconcile them? So Sri Aurobindo says, seized in a truth which lives in its own light. It doesn't need to explain itself. When that truth is touched, that bedrock, the fountain of world's delight, then there is a reversal, the Ashwath tree. Then everything is self-explained and self-reconciled. There is no need of analysis and reason and logicization. Everything is just as it should be and will be as it should be in the long process of unending time. So these last 5 lines. The sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed, the estrus which creates with fire of pain, the fate that punishes virtue with defeat, the tragedy that destroys long happiness, the weeping of love, the quarrel of the gods, seized in a truth which lives in its own light. His soul stood free, a witness and a king.